Okay, this is going to be a short run today. We're under heat advisory, so I'm going to take the following items. I'm not really planning on cooking anything today. I'm just going to grab a sandwich, maybe a couple of drinks. Nothing hardcore, so that means I'm going to take my solar charger for my phones. That's my table, my cooler, and my chair. That's pretty much it today. It's going to be short. No, I'm going to be a little lazy today. I like McCambridge Park, pretty cool spot. But you can see I have my chair, my table, and those items, but there's a nice picnic table in the shade. I'm not really planning on spending a whole heck of a lot of time out of here today. So, since I'm here, this is what I'm going to do. Got a couple things I want to talk about. I just decided to go to Subway and get a wrap. A little quickie Dasani, a little lemonade. That's about it. I still have my cooler. Everything's kept cool. Not planning anything hardcore, as I said earlier. The subject that I'm thinking about today is MAETOGA. While I'm munching with food in my mouth, but MAETOGA is an acronym that I coined for minimalistic, anthropometric, ergonomic, total off-grid applications. Right now, in cities such as like Burbank, which is where I'm at right now, nobody can really afford to live here. Things are, the cheapest rent that I've seen in Burbank is around $1,600 a month for a one bedroom. That's for an older place, not with any amenities or anything in it. You really couldn't really raise a family here unless you have a very specialized occupation. For the average Joe, if we're fighting to get $1,600 minimum a month for one bedroom, what would it take for, well, you can forget a house. That doesn't even exist anymore. It's almost an impossibility here to buy a house in California, let alone any property. The only opportunity that you have is to pretty much leave California or go to the very remote places where the land has no value and try to create something that you can afford, and the average person doesn't have the money to build a quote-unquote house by California regulations. The reason that the tiny house movement is so strong is because you have home ownership even though you do not have land ownership. But at least you have a home that you can move to another location if it allows. And usually by that time you would probably pay anywhere from $300 to $600 or $700 a month, hopefully in a place like Arizona. Not quite sure if that applies to California anymore. When I talk about MAETOGA, I would say that there's two categories of MAETOGA in my mind at the moment. One would be static MAETOGA, where you actually have a place where you can actually sit still in one location, which is usually everyone's desire. And then you have what's called the nomadic MAETOGA. Nomadic MAETOGA you would probably see with like vans, van life, trucks, cars, tents, all these different things, or just raw backpacking, raw out living in the street, but it's more of a nomadic life. Whereas you do not have a place, quote unquote, to call a residence, you do have the freedom of not worrying about trying to make rent every month. In addition to trying to make rent every month, you'll be trying to pay the utilities and pay for the insurance and pay for the furniture that is in there. So if you live in a van or a truck or a car, whatever, you are forced to embrace minimalism because you can only grab what you need. Now, if that's applied to houses, then that's where you see kind of the tiny house movement. You have to adopt a completely different philosophy. Biblically speaking, from the Bible school that I go to, you can use the children of Israel. They took 40 years in the wilderness. Those 40 years in the wilderness, they packed tents and they had to follow a cloud, which was a pillar of a cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night. They stood under that cloud that whole time, but they were 40 years out there with no quote-unquote static location. So they were probably, as far as I'm concerned, the first nomads. After that, when they crossed over into the promised land, then they were given, according to their inheritance, places to stay that were more permanent. And then that's where you see Solomon's temple, Jerusalem, the whole kit and caboodle. But my point here is that they only took what they needed. They didn't take anything that they wanted. They had everything that they needed to survive. And you were talking about 600 some odd thousand men with women and children. You're looking at 2.5 million people living nomadically out in a wilderness. Now, I guess my whole point on that is using that as nomadic MAETOGA, it goes to show you that it's possible, because you see people with vans and trucks and whatnot doing that right now. And they've managed to embrace a lifestyle that most people either look down upon it, but it has a ton of merit because they're not worrying about rent. The younger people are using it so that they can save money to try to find places. Older and less fortunate people are actually forced into dealing with something like that, and after they're forced to deal with it, they find that the freedom is much easier than trying to deal with people that have a preconceived notion about them. And I can see the validity of that. I can see why they feel the way that they do. I totally agree. First of all, we're not trying to satisfy society's notions that you should live a specific way. So, just kind of my thoughts on that. What it forced me to do, well, it didn't force me to do, it just made me desire, as a residential designer, I've done that for 35 years, over half my life. What I realized is that I've had the chance to do a lot of homes, big mansions. The smallest home I've designed so far is 283 square feet. I'm going to put that on another channel that I've called MAETOGA. What I'm going to do with MAETOGA is I'm going to strictly dedicate it to alternative lifestyles and approaches from an architect's point of view. Hopefully, as I do this, I can learn and try to make some sense out of the things that I'm living with. Just another quick thought in my mind as I'm chewing on things today. What is the quality of life? What is it that's going to, what is it that defines, oh, well, I'm doing very well. Oh, this is great. This is what we need to be doing. That's a relative term. Some people, it could be furniture, house, car, bed. It can be pretty much anything. Others, it could be a place where the sky is not their ceiling and the ground is not their floor. It's a relative term. And so how would you differentiate, or in my case, create something that will satisfy them to the point where they're happy? I've had cases where I've done magnificent pieces and it never really boiled down to anything of substance. Some of the stuff was trash. And they'll say, oh, what do you think about what I want you to do? And I'm like, oh, I think it's fine. And I would be lying. It was horrible. But sometimes we do things like that because that's their definition of happy. So I really couldn't argue with it. But secondly, if they're paying me to do a task for them, I'll do it. But the reality is that I won't take credit for it. Some people think that they know everything, and that's fine. They're entitled to that. Doesn't make it right. You know, I lost my brother-in-law last week after making that last video. He was in his 60s, is a former war veteran. He had major PTSD. Ended up with having some pretty bad health. It caught up with them and nobody was really prepared. But you have to ask yourself this question. According to the Bible, you have about 70 years. The average human life span is 70 years and 80 by reason of strength. So if you bust your ass up to 65 years old, which is the theoretical age of retirement, I'm just starting into my 60s as of now. That gives me 5 years to enjoy the fruits of my labor from 60 years. Within that time, I have to develop a career, raise a family, work on retirement. All that stuff's just a big lie when you talk about the American dream. The American dream is a lie. I designed it, and most of the things that I discovered from designing a chunk of the homes is a lot of people pursue their homes as being monuments to themselves. Most of the time they don't need the space. It's more of a statement on showing what we own. The reality is that we don't own anything. Just observation. I speak from the person on the other end that is designed for these people. It's not so. We really can do better with the way that we look at things. In the other countries, they've learned to live off of less square footage. Here, the minimum square footage right now is around 1,500 square feet. When I grew up, I lived in 860 square feet. I had 2 sisters, so we had a total of 5 people in 860 square feet with a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. And we somehow managed to grow up and make it, and everything was okay. So when you really start looking at things, again, I'll ask myself, what do we really need? More importantly, it's not what we have. The question is, what makes you happy? If your happiness is in owning a home, you don't really own it, because eventually, even if you own it in terms of land, it can be taken away from you, even though you pay your taxes on it. If the development comes along, or the right development comes along, the city can use eminent domain and snatch your property from you and force you to surrender it. So you have to ask yourself, do I really own this? Answer is no. The validity that I actually begin to see with the smaller homes, especially your tiny houses, is that if everything goes to hell, you could take that house and find another location and drop it down and continue to exist. If you own a van, the van is your home. You can use trucks, you can use cars, whatever, Priuses, whatever floats your boat. Point is, you're not subject to the system. Now, I would say this too, when we talk about the system. Imagine if everybody did not own the land, and they were not subject to the utility companies. That means that they would have to be completely off-grid. If they came up with off-grid systems like in vans and whatnot, you're not paying into the local utility company. You're getting your water as you need it, so you're not hooked into a sewer system. You're not hooked into a water system. You're probably you don't have a phone per se, you're using Netflix or Starlink or whatever, all the other things that come along with that. So you're not subject to that. So if you're not subject to all these things, then what if everybody did the same thing? You would have a massive societal change because there would be no dependence upon these so-called amenities that you have by living in a regular home. If you wanted to solve a homeless crisis, the objective of being, or the definition of being homeless, is that you don't have a house to live in or an apartment or whatever. You're not paying rent. You're not contributing to society because you don't have the means to do it. But if you're homeless, you're not paying a utility bill, you're not paying a gas bill, you're not paying a phone bill, you're not paying a cable bill. You have a different type of freedom that might actually, if it were harnessed correctly, and you've already embraced the minimalistic style, but if you could embrace the off-grid method, let's say, for example, you have a source of electricity that may be solar. Let's say that you have a way to use the bathroom where you're not contributing and making an issue toward toilets and sewers and whatnot. If you had those two things covered, and let's say you created a way to do a shower or something to keep yourself clean other than baby wipes, because eventually you're messing with the carbon footprint because you're using throwaway items. But if you can get rid of that, you just might have something there. Just a thought. Another question. What the hell is the definition for a low-income home? If you have low income, let's say you make $20,000, $30,000 a year, which years ago was more than enough to own a home. Now you can't even pay rent with it. How would you create what's called a low-income home? First of all, something that would have to be tied into the system, and the system itself would dictate that you can't afford it. Just amusing. I think it's all, as I chew on things and I embrace the MAETOGA idea, it's all a different form of hypocrisy. Because you're still dependent upon something that's going to make money for your municipality, or pay for your government, pay for your, you could say taxes, I won't say it like that, but to pay for a system that's not really benefiting you. And the average person that's doing that is probably working 2-3 jobs just to try to maintain or put in an unreasonable amount of hours to try to sustain a lifestyle that society tells them that they should have. I just kind of have difficulty believing in that at this moment, even based upon the things that I've done. Well, it was a good, nice, quiet day. I'm going to wrap this one up. I just wanted to get some things off my brain and try to put them in some kind of form so that I can start on something new. Something where I have self-satisfaction from it. My days are not guaranteed like everyone else's. So I wouldn't want to waste any more time trying to pursue the things that are unattainable. Try to focus on the things that can be done and see if anyone else, if they can benefit by the experiences that I have, then all the more the better. All right, wrapping this one up. You guys take care.